The year is 2022. Deep beneath the quiet soil of Nordhausen, Germany, a team of archaeologists lowers a floodlight into darkness that hasn't seen daylight since the fall of the Third Reich. The beam strikes cold concrete, twisted metal, and a sealed iron door stamped with the faded insignia of the Waffen-SS. Dust hangs in the air like ash. Behind that door lies what the world was never meant to find: the remains of a hidden wartime project buried at the end of World War II. A name scratched onto rusted steel reads only Eisenregen. Iron Rain. The silence is heavy, but history is about to speak again. Chapter 1. The Silence Beneath Nordhausen. Before the war ended, Nordhausen was a small industrial town in central Germany, quiet, grey and unremarkable. Families lived by the rhythm of factory whistles, the smell of coal, and the whisper of trains passing through the Harz Mountains. No one knew what lay beneath their feet. Not the children walking to school, not the farmers who watched smoke rise from the hills, and certainly not the prisoners brought in under cover of night. By 1943, Germany was desperate. The Allies bombed cities daily. The Luftwaffe was losing the skies. Hitler demanded new weapons, weapons that could turn the tide. His Minister of Armaments, Albert Speer, turned to underground production. Bombs couldn't destroy what they couldn't see. So, engineers and soldiers descended into the limestone heart of the mountain. There, under Nordhausen, they carved out miles of tunnels with forced labor, a place they called Mittelwerk. Tens of thousands of prisoners from concentration camps were sent to dig and build. They worked by torchlight, choking on dust, surrounded by the sound of picks striking stone and the echo of boots. Many never made it out. The tunnels became both a factory and a tomb. It was here that Werner von Braun's V-2 rockets were assembled, the world's first long-range ballistic missiles. To the Germans, they were a symbol of technological triumph. To the Allies, they were a weapon of terror, falling silently over London and Antwerp. But beneath the official blueprints, another project took shape. Hidden within coded correspondence and restricted ledgers was mention of something else, an experimental initiative known only by a name: Eisenregen. Iron Rain. Unlike the V-2, its purpose was never recorded in open archives. Only fragments remain: a requisition for sealed glass containers, a list of chemical compounds, and signatures from SS medical officers, not engineers. By the war's final months, Nordhausen was collapsing under air raids. Allied bombers turned the surface to rubble, but the underground complexes endured. When American troops reached the area in April 1945, they found hundreds of corpses, half-finished rockets, and piles of documents. Officially, the tunnels were cleared, sealed, and later handed to the Soviets. But parts of the network were never mapped. Sections were flooded intentionally, their entrances bricked over. The remaining engineers were taken under Operation Paperclip, their work absorbed into new programs. Eisenregen was never mentioned again. For decades, Nordhausen returned to silence. The mountain became a tourist site, the tunnels a museum. The war faded into textbooks and family stories. But in the earth, beneath the moss and rock, something remained untouched. Records later revealed that a final convoy of trucks left the area in March 1945, escorted by SS security under orders from Berlin. Their cargo manifests were blank. Witnesses claimed the trucks entered the southern tunnel entrances and never came back out. By the time peace returned to Europe, no one asked questions. Too many secrets were already being rewritten. East and West divided Germany. The Cold War began, and the buried places of the Third Reich became bargaining chips, or simply forgotten. The people of Nordhausen rebuilt. Children played where the camps once stood. Generations passed. Then, nearly 80 years later, a team of archaeologists conducting a soil stability survey discovered a hollow echo beneath their instruments. An unmapped void deep within the mountain. At first, they assumed it was a sinkhole, but ground-penetrating radar revealed corridors, reinforced with steel, leading toward an area long thought collapsed. When the first borehole was drilled, the smell that emerged was sharp, chemical, metallic. It carried a weight of age and decay. What they found would reopen one of the darkest chapters of the war, a story of science pushed beyond morality, of secrecy layered beneath victory and defeat alike. And for the first time in decades, the world would hear the echoes of the silence beneath Nordhausen. Chapter 2. Operation Eisenregen. The discovery beneath Nordhausen triggered an immediate response from the German authorities. At first, it was treated as a historical find, a forgotten wartime tunnel, maybe a storage site. But once the first sealed chamber was breached and the crates were opened, everything changed. Inside were containers marked with a faded eagle crest and a single word stamped in red: Geheim, secret. Wrapped inside layers of tar cloth, lead-lined boxes held microfilm canisters, sealed glass tubes, and handwritten notes in an indecipherable chemical shorthand. Within days, the site was placed under Bundeswehr control, and the civilian archaeologists were removed under environmental hazard protocols. From that moment, a silence fell over the investigation, eerily similar to the silence that once buried it. But fragments began to surface. A leaked internal memo referenced a wartime program designated Operation Eisenregen. The documents described it as a field viability experiment, authorized in late 1944 under direct SS supervision. Its stated purpose: to test the dispersal efficiency of aerosolized nerve compounds in variable atmospheric conditions. In reality, it was something far worse. In the chaos of Germany's collapse, Nazi leadership sought any weapon that could change the war's direction. A final deterrent. Conventional bombs were not enough. Chemical weapons, though banned after World War I, were being quietly reconsidered. Hitler himself had been a victim of gas in the previous war. He'd publicly condemned its use, but desperation erodes conviction. Hidden programs like Eisenregen were born in that final, frantic winter, buried beneath legitimate rocket production to escape Allied eyes. In a recovered letter fragment attributed to SS Obersturmbannführer Kurt Mertens, dated February 1945, a chilling line was found. The mixture must cling to the lungs. It must survive the wind. Chemical experts later identified the compounds mentioned as precursors to Tabun and Soman, nerve agents not publicly documented until years after the war. But in these notes, formulas were already nearing completion. Historians had always believed the Reich lacked the production capacity to weaponize such materials before its fall. Eisenregen challenges that belief. The documents suggest they were developing microdiffusion canisters, small portable dispersal units designed to contaminate targeted zones without large-scale infrastructure. They were intended for rapid battlefield sterilization. In human terms, that meant entire platoons could be neutralized invisibly without a shot fired. Yet no evidence shows the weapon was ever deployed. Something, perhaps fear, perhaps chaos, halted it. Allied forces advancing toward Nordhausen may have forced the scientists to seal their work underground. It's possible they intended to destroy it, but lacked the time. The crates found in 2022 bore scorch marks, suggesting an attempt to burn or melt their contents. Instead, the iron doors were sealed and flooded, preserving everything in a dark, toxic stasis. Intelligence archives show that after the war, both the United States and the Soviet Union conducted independent surveys of Mittelwerk. Each side claimed to have taken only rocketry materials, but internal documents tell another story. A declassified CIA summary from 1953 mentions unconfirmed references to nerve compound prototypes recovered from central Germany, likely sourced from SS medical experiments. The report's closing note reads, "Further details classified under Project 41B, no further access authorized." To modern historians, that line has become a riddle. Project 41B is a ghost file, one that vanished from official archives decades ago. What little is known suggests it was a transatlantic collaboration during the early Cold War, focused on chemical defense systems. In other words, whatever was found beneath Nordhausen may have quietly shaped post-war weapons research on both sides of the Iron Curtain. Meanwhile, in Nordhausen itself, the people felt the weight of something reawakening. The town's mayor spoke briefly to the press, calling the discovery deeply unsettling and urging calm. But when journalists attempted to visit the site, they were turned away by soldiers citing contamination risks. Within a week, satellite imagery showed NATO vehicles positioned around the excavation zone. Then, as suddenly as it began, the story disappeared from headlines. Those who worked the dig later described strange precautions: decontamination tents, sealed hazmat suits, and personnel carrying radiation counters. One engineer recalled being told not to record any images beyond the outer chamber. Another claimed to have seen a film reel marked with the Reichsadler and American serial codes. If true, That could mean the material had already been handled once before, perhaps in secret, decades earlier. Why was Eisenregen buried? Was it guilt, fear, or simply control? The evidence hints at all three. Nazi scientists sought power in purity and precision, in the belief that science could redeem their failure. But beneath that was a moral void. What began as an experiment to end war quickly became one that erased humanity. The SS report spoke clinically of test subjects and results consistent with projections. There were no names, no ages, no acknowledgement of pain. As the years passed, those words decayed in the dark, until now. And in rediscovering them, we face the same question the world asked in 1945. How much of that knowledge did we truly bury, and how much did we choose to keep? Chapter 3. The Iron Rain. The air in the Harz Mountains was cold that April morning in 1945. Fog drifted through the valleys like smoke, clinging to pine and stone. Allied artillery thundered in the distance, echoing through the hills as the front crept closer each hour. Inside the tunnels beneath Nordhausen, the sound of war was muffled, a low, constant tremor that rattled bolts and dusted ash from the ceiling. Down there in the artificial twilight, the last phase of Operation Eisenregen was underway. Witness accounts are scarce. Most who entered those tunnels never left, but from recovered notes and fragments of diaries, historians have pieced together the final hours of the program. The SS had issued evacuation orders for the town, yet a small detachment of guards and scientists remained below ground. Their orders were clear: secure the research, prepare it for destruction if capture seemed inevitable. The men worked by the glow of acetylene lamps, their shadows dancing across concrete walls lined with racks of sealed cylinders and stacks of blueprints. One surviving engineer, interrogated by Allied forces later that year, recalled the stench of metal and vinegar, the hiss of valves opening in the dark. He described a test chamber, a narrow room lined with steel, its air thick with fumes. Inside were caged rabbits, their movements frantic, their eyes milky and wet. Mertens, the project head, stood behind a glass barrier with a stopwatch, recording every motion as a faint mist filled the enclosure. Within minutes, the animals went still. The experiment was logged as successfully dispersed at 42% saturation. The war outside was collapsing, but inside Eisenregen's tunnels, a different kind of madness took hold. The delusion of men who believed data mattered more than defeat. Even as the SS prepared to destroy the complex, shipments continued. Barrels labeled technical lubricant were loaded onto trucks bound for the south, escorted by armed guards. Some historians suspect those trucks carried components of the dispersal system, possibly the micro-diffusion units found in 2022. Others think the cargo was the chemical precursor itself, too unstable to transport far. By the first week of April, the Americans were closing in. Artillery shells struck the surface above Mittelwerk. Dust and rock fell like rain. Panic spread through the corridors. Prisoners, sensing the end, tried to flee toward the exits, only to find them sealed by guards. A survivor from the Dora Mittelbau camp later testified that the tunnels screamed, not from explosions, but from the cries of hundreds trapped inside. Then came the order. Mertens was instructed to flood the lower levels. Pumps roared to life, filling the experimental wing with water from the mountain's natural reservoirs. The goal was to bury the work, and everyone in it. Chemical drums burst as the water rose, releasing a slick rainbow film across the surface. The fumes alone were deadly. Witnesses recalled a sour, burning taste in the air that lingered for days. When American troops finally reached Nordhausen on April 11th, the town was in ruins. Smoke drifted over the cratered landscape. In the tunnels, they found bodies, broken machines, and rows of V-2 rockets in various stages of assembly. But beyond a collapsed steel gate, there was something stranger. A section sealed with fresh concrete. The engineers couldn't explain it, and with time running short, the soldiers moved on. The gate remained closed. Decades later, analysis of that concrete section revealed iron and lead filings mixed into the sealant, a method used for radiation shielding. Whatever lay behind it was meant never to leak. Not light, not air, not memory. The few documents that escaped the destruction show Eisenregen's final entry. Material secured, personnel reduced, awaiting clearance for transport. But the clearance never came. The war ended days later. Germany surrendered, and with it, Operation Eisenregen vanished into myth. Another ghost of the Reich, lost beneath layers of earth and denial. For years after, locals reported odd things around the mountain. Patches of ground where nothing grew, a metallic smell rising after rain. Once, in the 1960s, a group of miners drilling nearby struck an unexpected pocket of air. Within minutes, several collapsed, coughing violently. Authorities declared it a methane leak. The shaft was sealed and forgotten. No further investigation was permitted. And yet, as historians and forensic teams reopened those same chambers nearly 80 years later, the air carried that same faint odor. Acidic, artificial, human memory trapped in the lungs of the earth. For the soldiers of 1945, Eisenregen was just another target, one of thousands in a dying empire. But for the men who built it, it was something more. The culmination of a belief that knowledge could conquer morality. They thought they were making history. Instead, they buried it alive. As the floodlights flickered in those rediscovered halls in 2022, the silence returned. Not the silence of peace, but the kind that follows a scream. A silence that waits, heavy, patient, for the truth to surface again. Chapter 4. Ashes and Echoes. The storm passed, but what it left behind was harder to clear. When the war ended, Nordhausen was a graveyard of rubble and memory. The air still carried the burnt scent of fuel and limestone. Allied soldiers, hardened by months of combat, walked through the tunnels of Mittelwerk in stunned silence. They had seen battlefields, camps and cities reduced to ash, but nothing like this. Here, death was industrial, precise, methodical, and hidden deep enough that no one above could hear the suffering below. When the floodwaters finally drained from the lower chambers, the soldiers found the twisted remains of machinery and bodies alike. Steel drums floated like coffins in the dark. Some bore corrosion scars that bubbled outward, as if something inside had once burned without fire. Few dared to open them. The surviving engineers were interrogated, their words measured, their eyes hollow. One of them, when asked what Eisenregen truly was, simply said, "It was meant to end faster." He refused to explain further. Those who could have spoken later disappeared, either absorbed into Allied research programs or lost behind the new Iron Curtain. The Cold War needed scientists, not trials. What was left of Eisenregen's files was divided quietly between American and Soviet handlers. Each side took what it needed. The rest was buried, sealed, or destroyed. For the people of Nordhausen, silence was survival. They rebuilt their homes. They cleared the ruins. Families who had lived above the tunnels for generations planted new crops in soil that still glowed faintly under Geiger counters. No one asked why. No one wanted to remember. The war had taken too much already, but even in peace, history has a way of whispering back. In the 1950s, East German authorities repurposed sections of the tunnels for storage. Wine, fuel, munitions. Work crews occasionally unearthed fragments of machinery marked with the old Reich insignia. Each discovery was catalogued, then sealed again. The official narrative was simple. These were remnants of the rocket program, nothing more. Yet among workers, stories spread. They spoke of shadows in the far tunnels, of chemical burns that appeared after just a few hours underground. One miner described hearing dripping where no water should be, like rain falling on metal. By the 1970s, the tunnels were closed for good. Too unstable, officials said. Too dangerous. But no warning signs were ever posted, only fences, left to rust. Children who wandered too close found bits of wire, old metal badges, pieces of uniforms. Some took them home as souvenirs. For many, the ghosts of Eisenregen were nothing more than a rumor, a local legend buried beneath the politics of the Cold War. Then, almost 80 years later, the mountain gave up its secret. When modern researchers rediscovered the sealed chambers in 2022, they didn't find relics of victory. They found evidence of fear and guilt. The water that had preserved the site also kept its horrors intact. Notes written in pencil were still legible. Some contained formulas, others names, victims listed as samples. Chemical residue analysis revealed compounds never before recorded in wartime Germany. Mixtures designed to linger in air and soil long after release. A weapon that would not simply kill, but haunt the land itself. Cleanup teams arrived within days. NATO and the German government issued brief statements, citing environmental and historical assessments. But the scientists who entered the tunnels later described a kind of unease that no hazmat suit could shield against. "You could feel it," one of them said, "like the air remembered." The discovery reignited moral questions that had never truly been answered. How much of the Reich's scientific legacy had been absorbed, repurposed, or hidden behind classified projects after the war? How many nations had built their progress on knowledge taken from crimes no one dared to speak about? For some, Eisenregen became a symbol, not of the past, but of everything history had quietly forgiven in the name of advancement. In Nordhausen, the past refused to stay buried. Journalists returned. Families whose ancestors had worked in the tunnels began to speak, telling stories their parents had once silenced. Survivors of the Mittelbau-Dora camp came forward, their voices trembling with age but steady with memory. They described the screams, the smell, the sense that something beyond rockets was being made below ground. One survivor, a Polish engineer, remembered guards talking about the mist. He never saw it himself, but he said, "You could taste it on the air." The new generation faced a reckoning their grandparents had avoided. Schools began teaching about Eisenregen alongside the V2 program, a dark footnote, but one impossible to ignore. Documentaries aired interviews with historians and chemical experts. Each time, the same uneasy truth surfaced. The war might have ended, but the experiments had not disappeared. Their echoes lived on in laboratories, in patents, in the very science that built the modern world. And in that realization came sorrow. For the victims who had no names, for the scientists who traded conscience for discovery, for a nation still learning that silence is not the same as peace. When night falls over Nordhausen today, the mountain looks still. The forest grows thick over the old entrances, hiding the scars of concrete and steel. But on certain quiet evenings, when fog rolls down through the pines and the air feels heavy, locals say they can still hear something faint, a low hum, like wind moving through hollow tunnels. Maybe it's just the breath of the earth, or maybe it's history, exhaling at last. Chapter 5. Shadows in the Light. Today, the tunnels of Nordhausen lie silent again, sealed under reinforced concrete, guarded not by soldiers, but by memory. The air above is clean now. Grass grows where the factories once stood. Children walk to school past plaques that speak of the V2 rockets and the prisoners who built them. Yet few signs mention Eisenregen. Officially, it remains an unverified program, a term that comforts bureaucracy more than it comforts truth. Still, beneath the weight of those words, history breathes, and it waits. The discovery of the tunnels in 2022 did more than unearth a secret. It forced the world to confront the shadow of progress. The 20th century was built on innovation. The jet engine, the computer, the vaccine. But many of those breakthroughs emerged from a century that also perfected destruction. Operation Eisenregen was never about defense or deterrence. It was about control. Control over life itself, reduced to data on a clipboard. And when the war ended, that knowledge did not vanish. It was repurposed, renamed, and reclassified. Nations called it science. Survivors called it betrayal. In the years since the rediscovery, Germany has wrestled with the implications. Should the site remain sealed, a tomb for the sins of the past? Or should it be opened, documented, and displayed as a warning? Historians argue both sides. Some say we must see what was done. Look into the dark, unflinching. Others say some things are better left buried, that exposure risks fascination. But history has never respected silence. It finds its own way through the cracks. Around the world, archives began to stir. In Washington, long-sealed intelligence files were quietly reclassified. In Moscow, chemical research logs once marked Soviet eyes only resurfaced online. Both hinted at early post-war experiments using compounds nearly identical to those described in the Eisenregen notes. Neither side admitted to direct use, but their existence spoke volumes. The Cold War may have ended, yet the race that began beneath the mountain never truly stopped. It just changed uniforms. Still, amid all the analysis, one truth remains constant: the human cost. The prisoners who died carving those tunnels, the scientists who traded empathy for efficiency, the civilians who rebuilt over their graves without ever knowing. They are the thread that connects every lab, every bunker, every secret. Their suffering is not just history, it's inheritance. And with every rediscovery, we are forced to ask, what will we do with what they left behind? Modern Germany has made remembrance a national duty. Memorials rise from places once meant to hide the past. Yet Eisenregen challenges that comfort. It is not a story of liberation or triumph. It is a reminder that even the most advanced civilizations can lose their humanity in the pursuit of progress. The lesson is not simply that evil was done, but that it was done with intellect, organization, and purpose. Ordinary people, brilliant minds, methodically building instruments of suffering because they believed they were serving a higher logic. The more we learn, the more that idea unsettles us, because it did not end in 1945. It echoes in every laboratory where ethics bend to ambition, every boardroom where numbers outweigh lives, every archive where truth waits for courage to open it. Eisenregen is not just a relic, it is a mirror. In Nordhausen today, the mountain is quiet. Trees sway where searchlights once stood. The tunnels are sealed again, their entrances guarded by steel and warning signs. But history cannot be locked away. The past hums beneath the soil, steady, patient, reminding us that every discovery comes with a choice, to remember or to repeat. As evening falls, the last light catches on the memorial stones outside the old camp. Names carved into granite, some incomplete, some unknown. The wind moves through the grass, soft and even. If you listen closely, you can almost hear it. Not the machinery, not the experiments, but something simpler, a breath, a whisper, the sound of the world remembering what it promised never to forget. And so, the story of Eisenregen closes, not with revelation, but with reflection. Beneath the silence of Nordhausen, beneath the weight of years and dust, lies a truth older than war, that humanity's greatest battles are not fought on fields or in skies, but within the choices we make when no one is watching. The tunnels may stay dark forever, but the lesson they carry must remain in the light.